Hey everybody, Gary Simmons here for the Game Institute and welcome back. This time to lesson 49 of the Dead Earth game development series. It's going to be pretty light from a coding perspective. We're really just going to concentrate on getting Jill's animator set up with all of the audio player scripts so that all of these animations now have their correct corresponding sounds. And we're going to start on the base layer of Jill. Now at the moment, on the base layer of Jill, we have added sound scripts to her idle, her walk, jog, sprint, and her turn right and her turn left, but we haven't added any sound scripts to any of her crawling animations, which we need to make sure that we do that first. So if you haven't got her selected already, open up Zombie Jill in the scene hierarchy, select on the AI entity game object, and then call up the animator window. Remember, if you don't already have the animator tab open, you can do that by going to the window menu and choosing animator. Okay, so we're going to start off with the crawling idle animation. Now this is a pretty easy one because if we look at it in the animation preview, we can see that it doesn't really move around at all. So all we really want her to do in this animation is just do the standard zombie groaning that we do in the standard idle. So all we're going to need is a AI layered audio source player that's going to play a sound from the zombie roaming audio collection. So let's select the crawling idle animation state, choose to add a behavior and choose to add an AI layered audio source player. And then we're going to select the audio collection to play is going to be zombie roaming. And we want to make this a looping sound so that if she stays in idle for a long time, it just keeps on selecting roaming sounds to play. And we also want to leave this set at bank 0 because you may remember that our zombie roaming audio collection only has one bank. And that is our crawling idle state done. Now we're going to go on to the slow crawl animation state. Now this is going to be a real pain because not only is it a long animation, as you can see, there's lots of things happening in it. We have the hands hitting the ground. We want a dragging sound when the body is being pulled along, which basically means there's going to be a lot of keys added to its curve. And to make things even worse for look, it's one of those pre-baked animations, which means we can't add the curve directly to the animation in the inspector, but instead we're going to have to create one of those custom curves and step through this animation a bit at a time and look at the normalized time down here to see where we need to put those keys. And you'll remember from when we've created custom curves before, the reason why this is a pain is because in order to do this easily, we want to have the preview window open so we can spool through the timeline of the animation. And we also want to have the curve window open as well. But as soon as we click on this tab here, the curve window is going to close, and that means we have to keep reopening it. And that is a real pain, but this is the only one that's really that difficult and that long. So we might as well get straight into that now. So in order for us to be able to add a curve to this animation state, we need to create a custom curve. So we have a folder in our project view somewhere. I think it's called custom curves. There it is, custom animation curves. And with that selected, we're going to go to the assets menu, the create sub menu, and we're going to choose to create a new custom curve. And I'm going to call this the same as the animation state. So I'm going to call this zombie crawl slow. Now, because we want to work on this curve, what we want to do is have two inspectors open at the same time. So before I open up a second inspector, I'm going to click on the zombie crawl slow animation state in Jill's base layer, select the zombie crawl animation, and then I'm going to go up to the top right corner of the inspector and lock it. Okay, so as I start to select other things, I still keep the animation preview window open. So the next thing I'm going to do is up in this area here where we have the scene window and the animator window, I'm going to, from the little drop down, choose to add a tab, and I'm going to add another inspector. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select from our custom animation curves folder that new animation curve that we just created. As you can see at the moment, it's just a flat line with everything on 0. So now what I can do is I can kind of seek through the animation like this, and when I say, right, I want to add a keyframe, I can open that up, I can add the keyframe in the relevant place. And like I said, it's a real shame that we can't dock this somewhere and keep the window open. That's a pain, but we'll have to deal with it. Okay then, so just bear in mind while we're creating this curve, to remember that this is the curve that is going to drive an audio collection player script on our zombie crawl slow animation state. And the audio collection I'm going to use is going to be our standard zombie footsteps audio collection. That audio collection has two banks. in the first bank we have the standard footstep sounds, and I'm going to trigger one of those standard footstep sounds whenever the zombie's hand hits the floor in this crawling animation. But that audio collection also has a second bank that has leg dragging sounds in it, and I'm going to trigger those sounds throughout this animation to make it sound like the zombie is dragging its own body along the floor. Okay, so we know what we're doing. Let's select our curve again and let's start stepping through this animation and finding out where the various keys need to be. Okay, so very near the start of the animation we wish to play a dragging sound. We'll quickly just put a command to play a sound from bank 1, which is a 2. So let's open that up, add a key right near the beginning, edit that and set this to a value of 2. And then what I'll do is I'll close down the curve window and open it up again so that all rescales and everything fits on the screen. Add another key, I think, there. Once again, set that to 2. Also set the handles to flat. And then I'll add a key and I'll set that one down to 0. Once again, setting the handles to flat. So that little spike at the beginning we know is going to give a 2 command to our audio collection player, which is going to tell it to play a sound from its second bank, bank 1. Okay, so the next place we want to play a sound is, if I seek through the animation, you can see the right hand of the zombie hits the floor around about 0.1. And this time we want to play a standard footstep sound. So that's going to be a sound from bank 0, so we want to put a 1 in the animation. And like I said, that needs to be around 0.1 in time. So I edit the key, 0.1, and set that to 1. And right before it, I'm going to add another key that we just clamp down to 0, because remember, our audio collection player script remembers what the last command was, so it doesn't repeatedly play the command. So we just want to make sure that once we've issued a command, we change the command down to 0, so it knows that the next time, say, another 1 command comes along, it knows it's to play a different one. It's not just a continuation of that same command. So I'm going to put that to flat. And I'm going to put that down to 0. And we need that to stay up there for a little while. So once again, I will create a new key. I'll edit that key, set it to a value of 1, set it to flat. Add another key here, set that to flat, edit the key, and give that a value of 0 again. I want to move that in, something like that. Let me edit the key again just to make sure as I dragged it I didn't change the value from 1. So you can see there is our drag sound. Remember, this doesn't indicate the length of the drag sound. The drag sound will play until the drag sound has stopped playing, and the same for the footstep sound. But this is just indicating while this is 2 to play a sound. So you can think of that as just one play request, and this is another play request. Okay, so if I look at this again now, we can see that another hand goes down, the left hand goes down. So let's add another key here, edit that key and set the time to 0.19 and set the value to 1 also. Just keep that simple and let's put that to 0.2. Once again, we'll add another key. We'll make sure that that's set to 1 as well. We'll create another key, which is going to be the key that makes it come down. Let me put the handles on flat to something like that. And let me just edit that key and make sure it's definitely going down to 0. And let's put another key in there as well. Just going to flatten it, drag it down, and set that to 0 as well. So now we've got, one dragging sound it instigated, and that dragging sound is probably long enough that it will carry on going over these 2 hand sounds, and then we've got the 2 hand sounds being slapped down, because remember, this is all happening in a very short space of time. So if I look at the animation again, that second hand goes down, and then we want to around about 0.2, so pretty much straight after we want to instigate another dragging sound, and then have another hand sound at about 0.37. I think what I'll do actually is, rather than make this go down to 1 here, I will make it go up to 2, and that will be the next drag sound. And that can pretty much stay on 2 now until 0.37, which is where we want to make another hand sound. So let's edit the key there, change the time to say 0.330 just to be safe, set that to 2. And set the handles to flat, and then we're going to add another command here, which is going to be at 0.37, but this time it's going to have a value of 1, so it's going to trigger another standard footstep sound. So we'll set that to 1, and we'll set this to 0.37. Let's flatten the handle. Oops. Okay, let me just edit that. If ever you drag it and you think you've moved it up and down, make sure that you definitely set the value again, because our code is pretty strict on that. If it's slightly less than 2, it will register as a 1. We always round down. Okay, so at this point then, what we've done is we've done a drag, a footstep sound, another drag, and then at 0.37 we've done another hand sound, and there wants to be another hand sound at 0.51. What we'll do is around about here, we'll add another key, flatten it, and we will set that to 1 also, the value that is, and then we'll create another key that makes it go down to 0. Because we need to do another footstep sound, so we need to make sure that it doesn't get interpreted as part of the same footstep sound. Yeah. Okay, and let's just flatten that. And I said 0.51 is where we want the next hand sound to be made. So let's put 2 keys in there, and for the second key I will edit it, and I will set that to 0.51, and I will set that back to 1. So that's this hand here now, hitting the floor in front of us. Let's just move that up a bit like so. And then I think at this point, we will start another drag straight afterwards, okay? So I'll add another key in there. I will flatten it. Then I'll edit the key. I'll set that to be a value of 1 just for a short space of time. And then right after that, I will then create another key that's going to go up and do another dragging sound. Edit key. Set the value to 2. Flatten it. Then check with our animation to see where the next hand sound needs to be made. It needs to be made around about 0.75-ish. So we'll say 0.75. So let's add a key there, flatten it, edit the key, put that at 2 also. This is just a continuation of that same drag sound. Doesn't matter how long it is. Just as long as it's not so short that there's a chance that we could miss it in a single frame of animation. And then we'll just make that go all the way along to, I said a 0.75, wasn't it? So, and then we'll add another key now at 0.75, which is again going to be another one from bank 0, which is going to play another standard footstep sound when that hand slaps down there. And then there's another standard hand sound at around about 0.9. Yeah, so I think what I'll do for that is, so I'll add another key here, just so we have a little bit of time here to trigger that last hand sound. I'll flatten it, set the time, set the value, sorry, to 1. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add another key to add another drag sound, because I think this drag sound might have timed out by then, possibly. If it turns out that when I play this back, we hear lots of drag sounds overlapping, and that causes a problem, then we can always come and remove some of these drag sounds. But I don't think it's going to really matter, because in reality, when he's dragging himself along, there will be several points of contact on the zombie where he would be dragging. So the leg might be dragging and making a noise, and so too might the other leg or a shoe or something like that. Yeah, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to edit that key. I'm going to set that back up to 2. Like so, just to spawn another drag sound. And the next hand sound we wish to make is actually, like I said, at about 0.9 will be fine. So around about here. So I will add a key there, flatten it, edit it to be the continuation of the 2, and I'll take that up to about 0.89 or 88. And then I'm going to add the very last hand sound here. So I'm going to flatten it, edit the key, put this down to 1 and set it to 0.9. I think that's probably the last one we need now. So let me just flatten that. Edit the key, make sure it's definitely clamped to 1. I don't think we'll need another drag sound there. Okay, I think that might be our curve. Now, of course, we need to test that now. So in order to do that, we need to go to Zombie Jill's animator. And we can unlock the inspector at this point. And we can actually get rid of the other inspector. We don't need it. Although I'll leave it there for now because we will need it in a minute, because I know our zombie fast crawl is also using an animation that needs a custom curve, but fortunately it's not anywhere near as complicated as this custom curve. So I'm going to select the zombie crawl slow animation state, and I'm going to add an audio collection player script. It's going to communicate its commands on COM channel 1, because remember that is the standard channel that we use for broadcasting footstep commands. And as the audio collection, I'm going to choose our zombie footsteps audio collection. And for the custom curve, well, then I'm going to choose that new curve that we just created. And then we need to edit the string list, which just tells it to ignore all of the other layers. And you'll remember we've got a folder in our project called string lists, and we've already created them all that specify all the layers the audio collection player scripts on the base layer need to ignore. Hang on, if I just select zombie turn right and look at that audio collection player script, you can see that this is a string list called base. And if you look in our project view, we should see a folder in there called string lists. And in string lists, we've got layer exclusions, and in layer exclusions, we've got zombies, and it's that one we want there, base. So let's select zombie crawl slow and assign it the base string list. And just to remind you, the base string list just tells it to not play its sound if the lower body, interactive layer, hit layer, or cinematic layers are active. Okay, so our zombie is now triggering the sounds of its hand and its feet hitting the floor. At least we hope it will be. We'll test it in a minute. But we also want the zombie to carry on groaning and moaning while it's crawling around. So we want to add now a AI layered audio source player, assign it our zombie roaming audio collection. Once again, we can leave everything how it is, such that it's looping, it doesn't stop on exit, and it uses bank 0. And what I'm going to do now is select Jill's AI entity, and we want to configure her so that she's crawling from the start. And of course, in order to do that, we need to assign her some lower body damage, something up past about, what is it, 90? What's the crawl threshold? 70. So I'll put it to 77. Press play, see what happens. So she's in idle at the moment. That works perfectly. I'm really happy with that. So next up, we want to work on the fast crawl. And like I said, the fast crawl is another one of those pesky pre-baked animations, which means we're going to need to create a custom curve for it again. But fortunately, this is a very short animation. We'll probably just have 3 keyframes to it, right? We'll set it dragging at the beginning, and then we'll have a hand slap and a hand slap. Yeah, so that should be quite easy. Okay, so let's create a custom curve called Zombie Fast Crawl. So in my project view, I'm going to select my custom animation curves folder. And then from the assets menu, I'm going to choose to create a new custom curve. And I'm going to call this Zombie Fast Crawl. Remember, we still have those 2 inspectors open at the moment. So what I'll do is I am now going to select the Zombie Fast Crawl animation, like so. And then I'm going to lock the inspector, much like we did before. Then I'm going to select that new custom curve that we just created, which is called Zombie Fast Crawl. Select the second inspector, and now we have the curve window and the animation up on screen. So once again, like we did before, right at the beginning of this animation, we'll send a command to play the dragging sound from bank 1. Let's go into this new curve, somewhere near the beginning, add a key, edit that key, and give it a value of 2. Once again, we'll close down the window and then reopen it so that it all gets rescaled and everything fits on the screen. We don't have to be so picky here with how long and short everything is, because we only have a few things to add here. So we'll make it about that long. I will make that flat. And then what I'll do is I will scroll along to see where the first hand comes down. And you can see it's around, actually right in the middle, it's 0.5. The second hand needs to come down right near the end. So we'll say like 0.9. Okay, so 0.5 is where the first hand is, so we'll move this all the way over to 0.48. Once again, I'll edit the key to make sure I haven't moved it to a value less than 2, and then I'll add a key just after it. Like I said, we want to set this at a time of 0.5. I set it to a value of 1, flatten the handles, add another key, set that to 1 as well. Should be getting the general idea of how we do this now. Flatten that. I don't think... How long is the animation? Do we actually need 2 dragging sounds in there? We probably don't, do we? Let's just see how we get on with 1 dragging sound. Okay, so there's our one dragging sound trigger, and then we'll make this go down to 0 for a little bit of time so that we can trigger another hand coming down sound. So I'll edit that, set it down to 0, add another key there, set that to 0. And then around about 0.95, we will add another command to trigger that second hand coming down. Let's flatten that for a moment. Yeah, something like that. And let's edit that key, make sure it's definitely 1. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. Remember, whenever I move anything around, I definitely check that those values have definitely stayed at 0, 1 and 2 respectively. So that is our curve for our fast zombie crawl. So let's select our zombie crawl fast. Actually, I need to unlock the inspector first of all, and then select zombie crawl fast. And the first thing we'll do is we will add an audio collection player to it. Once again, we're using the footsteps collection, so we'll leave it on COM channel 1. We'll select the zombie footsteps audio collection. We will assign it that new zombie fast crawl curve that we've just created, and we'll assign it the base string list. Unlike the zombie crawl slow, which uses the sound of the zombie moaning, the ambient sound that we want to play when the zombie is crawling fast, I think should probably be the same audio collection that we use when the zombie is jogging, which was the zombie run audio collection, which made sounds like and I think that will probably work better with the zombie crawl fast, I think. So, well, let's see. So I'm going to add an AI layered audio source player. I'm going to assign that the zombie run audio collection. Once again, we'll leave this looping. On this one, I think I will tick stop on exit so that if we have this kind of looping sound, it does stop when we stop crawling fast, such as if we walk up to the player and then we start swiping left or right or biting the player's ankles. Okay, so I think probably the best way to test this, rather than just start the game up, run so the zombie can see us, I think what I'll do is I will just set Jill so that she is by default set to patrol at a speed of 2 instead of 1. That means she will do if she's a crawling zombie, she'll crawl fast instead of crawling slow. So let's see what happens here. Once again, I think that worked perfectly. Let me just double check the sounds are definitely in time with the hands. Yeah, look at those hands, perfectly synced up with the sounds. Okay, so that is our 2 standard crawling locomotion animation states done. Cool. So next up, we're going to work on the sound for the left swipe and the right swipe animations that are on our base layer. These are special case attack animations that are only executed when our zombie is in a crawling state. And that's why they exist on the base layer and not on our attack layer, because of course our attack layer has a mask on it, so that the animations on this layer only affect the upper half of the bone hierarchy of the zombie. And that's why when we select our attack animations on the attack layer, they have an audio collection player to, for example, play the swipe sounds, but they don't have the layered audio source because that's going to come through from whatever layer is underneath it. So for example, if we're currently in a walking state and we're attacking, we know that this audio collection player won't play, and instead the swipe sound on the attack layer will play, but we do know that its AI layered audio source will play and we'll have the zombie going ugh. However, if the zombie is jogging whilst attacking, then we know that as well as playing a swiping sound on the attack layer, on the base layer, the AI layered audio source player will actually be playing the run sound. So we're going so we don't have to worry on the attack layer of making sure that we add a layered audio source to each of the attack animations, because it's supposed to kind of inherit that from the layer underneath it. However, on the base layer, where we have these special case attack animations that need to commandeer the entire bone hierarchy, we need to make sure that we don't just have an audio collection player on it to play the swiping sound, but we also need to make sure that we have an AI layered audio source so that we can play what will probably be just the standard zombie roaming sound. So fortunately, Unfortunately, the left swipe and the right swipe animations are not those pre-baked animations, so it does mean that we can add the curves directly to the animation itself. And in fact, if I double click on the left swipe animation, you can see in the project view that the asset is actually called crawlattack.fbx. And if I select crawlattack.fbx, you can see that we have a series of animations in there, left swipe and right swipe. So both the left swipe and the right swipe both come from the same source FBX file, so we can add the curves to both of them here. So I'm going to start with the left swipe. If I open up the curves drop down, you can see that we pretty much can see already where we need to put it, because we already have a left hand curve there, which is used to identify whereabouts in the animation the zombie is actually going to do damage to the player. And we have the same for the right hand as well. If I go to the right swipe animation, hey, there it is. So really the curve that we're going to add is going to be pretty much like that, not that different at all. So just to remind myself, if I select one of my attack animations and look at its audio collection player script, we can see that all of our swipe sounds are in an audio collection called Zombie Swipes. And you can also see in the project view, this is in our audio collections folder. It contains a series of zombie swipes. So we're going to use this for the swipes that are used by the crawling animations as well. And also notice that it is an audio collection with a single bank. Okay, so the commands that we put in the curve simply need to be ones wherever we want a swipe to happen. Okay, so let's go back to our left swipe animation by double clicking on the left swipe animation, selecting the crawl attack FBX file, and then in the inspector, select the left swipe from the animation list. And then we're going to add a new curve. And of course, we're going to call this curve com channel. I think it's 2, isn't it? I forgot what com channel the attacks come in on. Let me just apply those changes a minute. Call up my attack layer. Select one of my attack animations. Yes, they come in on com channel 2. So we need to make sure that the curve that is going to use our swiping animations come in on com channel 2. Okay, so let's now spool through the animation and see where the swipe should begin. So it should begin around about 0, about there, I think. So let's add a keyframe. Much nicer doing it this way than having to create a custom curve and keep going over to the curve window. And we'll just turn it off about there. Okay, and then I'll step back through the middle 2 keys that I've just added, and I'll set their values to 1. Like so. Okay, press apply, and then I'm going to go back up to the animation list, choose right swipe, and I'm going to add a curve on there as well. Once again, com channel 2 needs to be the name of the curve, because we don't want any commands being sent in via this animation to interfere with any footsteps, which, okay, in this particular animation, we know that wouldn't be the case because we haven't got these attack animations playing at the same time as walking animations. But as we put all of our other attack on com channel 2, let's put these attacks on com channel 2 as well. And then once again, we'll just go through the animation to see where the swipe starts. About there. Add a keyframe. Move on a little bit. Add another keyframe. And just turn it off somewhere along here. And then I'm going to go back and add the value of 1 to the second and third of the 4 keyframes that I've just added. And then I'm going to click apply. So we now have our left swipe and right swipe animations set up with their curves. Let's now select the state and set up their individual scripts. So on our left swipe animation state, I'm going to add a new behavior. I'm going to add an audio collection player. But this time I'm going to set it to listen on com channel 2. And as the audio collection, of course, we're going to give it our zombie swipes audio collection. We don't need to assign it a custom curve. And because this is on the base layer, the layer exclusion string list we need to assign it is the base string list. And then I'm going to do the same for the right swipe animation state as well. So once again, I'm going to add an audio collection player, set it to com channel 2, set the audio collection to zombie swipes, not assign it a custom curve, and assign it the base layer exclusions string list. Then I'm going to go back to left swipe and I'm going to set up its layered audio source. So I'm going to add an AI layered audio source player. And as the collection, I'm going to assign it our zombie roaming audio. We want it to be looping, needs to be bank 0. Do we want it to stop on exit? Nope, not necessary. And we'll do exactly the same for the right swipe animation state again. Once again, adding an AI layered audio source player and assigning it the zombie roaming audio collection. So our left swipe and right swipe attacks on the base layer for when the zombie is in a crawling state should now be set up. Next up, we'll configure the biting animation, which once again is a biting animation that is only done when the zombie is in a crawling state. We do have a separate bite animation, which is attack 2, on our attack layer for when the zombie is not in a crawling state. And we haven't actually assigned that a sound either yet. So what we'll do in a minute is we'll create a biting/feeding audio collection that both these states can use. But as I'm going to be testing the left swipe and the right swipe, I'll actually set up the biting animation for when the zombie is in a crawling state first, and then we can test all three of these together, and then we can easily go back to our attack layer and add that new biting audio collection that we're going to create to attack 2. Okay, so let's call up our base layer again. Double click on the biting animation. You can see that this animation is also contained within the crawl attack FBX file, which is the same one we got the left swipe and the right swipe from. So with the crawl attack FBX file selected in the project window, you can see in the inspector that we've now got the biting animation selected. And as you can see, we just want to have a kind of nice sort of feeding sound. And in fact, we don't need to add a curve to this, because in this animation, you can see it's always feeding. So we don't need to actually have curves. We'll just use a layered audio source for this so that it starts playing as soon as we enter the biting state. So that means the first thing we need to do then is create a new biting/feeding audio collection. So in the project view, let's drill down into our sounds folder and into our audio collections folder. And with our audio collections folder selected, let's go to the assets menu and choose to create a new audio collection. And I'm going to call this zombie feeding. That way it can be used for when the zombie is actually attacking us by biting us, and also when the zombie is feeding on a corpse on the ground. With the zombie feeding audio collection selected, let's now make sure that we assign it the zombies audio group, so that all the sounds in this group come through the zombie channel on our mixing desk. And we'll set the volume down to roughly what the same volume is of the zombie roaming, which is, actually no, it would be a little bit quieter than that, wouldn't it? So we'll put it down to about 0.2 in volume, and we'll see how that goes. Of course, we need the spatial blend to be 1 so that it's actually a 3D sound that attenuates with distance from the listener. But while we're testing, I'm just going to put it down to kind of 0 so that it's a 2D sound and we don't have to worry about sort of being close to the zombie to hear any sounds in this group playing. So next up, we need to create one bank. This is only going to have one bank, and I can't remember actually how many sounds we have here. So I'm going to lock the inspector. I'm going to scroll down and look at my zombie sounds folder. And in the ambient subfolder, you can see we have 4 feeding sounds. Actually, let me unlock the inspector. I need to configure these, don't I? Because I'm not sure if I've set the import settings on these yet. And they sound a bit like this. And here's another one. And the next one. Okay, so let me just see. Are these? Let me select all of these. So I'm going to select zombie feeding 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm going to make sure that I've forced them to mono. I'm just going to play them back as standard WAV files, I think, and we'll press apply. So let's go back to our audio collection. Let's select our zombie feeding group, and let's lock the inspector. Then drill back down into our zombie sounds/ambient folder, select the 4 feeding sounds that we've just configured, and drag and drop them into our clip bank. Okay, so that's our zombie feeding audio collection done. So let's now select our biting animation state. Let's add an AI layered audio source to it, and let's assign that our zombie feeding audio collection. We want to leave bank at 0 because there's only one bank. We wish it to be looping. We wish this sound to play for as long as we are actually feeding. But what we will do on this is we will say stop on exit. That way, when we exit this state, we definitely stop playing the feeding sound. And that's important because we might transition to a state that maybe doesn't have an AI layered audio source player on it. And if that was the case, then it would carry on playing. So we're just saying in this particular case, we want you to stop playing the feeding sound whenever we leave the feeding state. Okay, so what we probably need to do now is test this. So we've already set Zombie Jill to be in a crawling state, but what we want to do is make Zombie Jill go into an attacking state straight away. I don't want to have to worry about every time I press play walking over to Zombie Jill. So I think what I'll do is I will select our FPS controller rig and I will move it close to where Jill starts. There's our controller rig. Let's move it over there. I think I've just buried it in the ground, haven't I? Yes. So let me move that up a little bit. About there, maybe. Press play, see what happens. So here's Jill. And let's see if the attacks work. Yes. And there she is feeding on our legs. But yeah, that pretty much all works fine. I mean, one of the things that's going to make all of these sounds sound a lot better is once we've got the zombie sound sorted out, we're going to then work on the player reaction sound, so that when you hear the sort of the zombie's arm swiping at you, you're then going to hear the player sort of go, ah, ah, and that really will make it a lot different. But all of those sounds belong on the player rig, not on the zombie rig. We're just working on the zombie half of the equation at the moment. So at this point, we have now correctly configured all the sounds for all of the animation states on our base layer. We've also already set up all of the states on our lower body layer. Our upper body layer, which just contains a kind of limp upper torso, doesn't need any of its own sounds. And on the attack layer, we've set up most of the attacks, which are the swipes, but we haven't set up attack 2, the feeding attack. So I think for that, we'll just do what we did on the base layer. We'll just assign a layered audio source and we'll assign it the feeding sound. So yeah, so I think what I'll do is I'll just add a behavior to this, add an AI layered audio source, and then we'll just add the feeding audio collection to that. And once again, we'll make sure that we click stop on exit, so when we come back out of the attack state, we definitely don't play that feeding sound anymore. Because the animation does have a bit of an intro and a bit of an outro, it's not going to be synced up perfectly, so we might hear the feeding sound start a little too early and maybe carry on a little bit longer. But I think it works in the case of a feeding, because you can imagine the zombie getting ready to bite you and going just as it's about to bite you. And the same when the zombie pulls away from you, it's still going to have a bit of your flesh in its mouth so it can carry on eating it. And I think it's better doing it that way than doing it using an audio collection player where we have to put curves in the animation. Yeah, so I suppose really we should test that works, shouldn't we, and see what it looks like. So I think what I will do is what I've done in the past. I will make the chance of attack 2 very likely by saying if the attack is greater than 20 or it's less than 100. And then I will select Zombie Jill and I will configure her so she no longer starts in a crawling state by moving her lower body damage all the way down to 0. And then I'll press play and see what happens. She should come running straight over to us. Yeah, she is. See, it looks fine. And you really can't see there's any problem with that. Let me just push her away a minute and then come over here. So here she comes. Yeah, that works perfectly. So let me go back now to Jill's animator and make sure that I put the attack chance of the attack 2 transition back down from 100 back down to 36. So for now, the attack layer is done. The interactive layer has the screaming animation. We need to use a screaming sound for that. And that's going to be really easy. We're going to use a layered audio source, but I'm going to come back and do that in a moment because I want to talk a little bit about how I created the screaming sound effect that syncs up perfectly with the animation. Because as you can see, we don't want the scream to happen as soon as the animation starts playing, because the scream shouldn't really happen till about 38% of the way through the animation. We've actually got 2 screaming animations, in fact, and the other screaming animation has an even longer gap at the beginning before the scream should happen. So I'm going to show you how, looking at an animation like this, I can create a screaming animation so that when we start playing that sound, the moment we enter the screaming animation state, we hear a footstep on the ground at the right time, and then we also hear the scream start at the right time. And I'm not going to use any curves for that. I'm literally just going to create a wave file that starts on the first frame of the animation and contains the footstep and the scream in it. So that'll be a worthwhile discussion for if you're making your own sound effects and you want to know, well, how do I make a sound effect so that all of the correct bits happen at the right time in the animation? So I think the next thing we'll do is we'll go on to the hit layer, and for these top 3, you can see the feet don't move, so we don't have to worry about them having footstep curves on them. And the same is also true for the chest hit underneath here. Actually, yeah, well, it does step back, so we probably need some footsteps in that. And with the zombie hit left, you can see this animation also needs to not only go ah when the zombies hit, but we also need to have the animation sending footstep commands to an audio collection player script. Same for the right-hand side as well. So we'll start by creating a new audio collection that contains zombie pain sounds. So if we go down into the sounds folder, into the zombie sounds folder, and into the ambient folder, you can see that we have some sounds in here that are called Zombie Pain 1 through to 5, and they sound like this. Just different variants of a zombie being in pain from having some damage done to it. So we need to put these into an audio collection. So I'm going to go to my audio collections folder, make sure that's selected. Then I'm going to go to the assets menu, the create submenu, and choose to create a new audio collection. I'm going to call this Zombie Pain, like so. Then I'm going to go back to the zombie sounds / ambient folder, select those 5 pain sounds, make sure that they're forced to mono, that we play them back in PCM. We don't need compression, they're short sounds, and then we hit apply. Next up, I go back to my audio collections folder, I select that new Zombie Pain audio collection we just created, and I'm going to lock the inspector. I'm going to set the audio group to zombies. I'm going to put the volume down to probably about 0.3-ish. We want these to be louder than feeding because, you know, a zombie going ow is a louder sound than a zombie chewing. So spatial blend for now I'll put down to 0, so it's a 2D sound, and we're going to go back later, revisit all of these audio collections we've created and put them back to 3D sounds. But the nice thing about them being 2D sounds is when I'm testing them, I don't have to be stood right next to the zombie to hear the sound play. I need to create an audio clip bank within the audio collection. This is only going to have 1 bank. And then with those 5 Zombie Pain sounds selected, drag and drop them onto the clips label in the inspector. So we now have an audio collection with our 5 Zombie Pain sounds in. Then I'm going to select my zombie hit face left of the animator controller, and I'm going to add an AI layered audio source player. And I'm going to assign it the Zombie Pain audio collection. I'm going to do the same for the next one as well, the zombie hit face front. Once again, assigning it the same collection of pain sounds. Do the same for zombie hit face right. Each time adding an AI layered audio source player and assigning it the Zombie Pain audio collection. However, what I do want to untick on these is looping. We don't want any of these to loop. We just want the sound to play once when this state is activated. And we'll do the same for the bottom 3 animation states as well, starting with the zombie body hit left. First of all, adding an AI layered audio source player, assigning that the Zombie Pain audio collection. Do the same for the zombie hit chest, once again assigning it the Zombie Pain audio collection. Both times remembering to turn off looping, very important. And finally, zombie body hit right, once again adding an AI layered audio source player, turning off looping, and assigning it the Zombie Pain audio collection. So all of the animation states now on the hit layer will correctly play a zombie in pain sound when the zombie is hit. But of course, we did discover just now that these animation states on the bottom row, they actually have some footsteps in them. So we probably want to add some curves to trigger those footsteps. So let's start with the zombie body hit left, open up its curves, add a new curve, and of course the footsteps always go on COM channel 1. And then let's just seek through it until we see where the first footstep should happen, which is about there. Add a keyframe. Add another keyframe next to it, to about there. And there's the first invocation of a footstep sound, and the second one's probably about there, which is 0.39%. And once again, you must know this pattern by now, where we kind of create what seems to be redundant keys, but they allow us to go straight up from a 0 to a 1 without having a large slope. But there's another footstep about there. One more footstep about there. That's that one done. So I'll just put in the 2 keys that will allow me to turn it off. So let's now use the forward and back buttons here so that we can step through them and assign a 1 to the inner keys of each group. I've done this right. So there's the first footstep, there's the second footstep, there's the third footstep. No, I've done this wrong, haven't I? This needs to be turned off in the middle of there, doesn't it? How did I get that so wrong? Okay, let me delete some of these. Opening up the curve window, choosing delete key. So that last footstep should actually happen right here where we're actually coming down. So in the middle here, I'll add 2 keyframes. And that second keyframe I'll set to 0. I'll then move along to that next keyframe, set that to 0. And then I'll set that last keyframe that I added to 1, and then we'll just go along a little bit more. Add another keyframe there, add another keyframe next to it. Go back to the previous keyframe that I just added, set that to a 1, and set that to a 0. Like so. So now, let me see if the footsteps sync up with the peaks in the graph. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep, they do. So that's cool. So let's click apply. So let's now add it to zombie body hit right. Oh, that's cool. It's already in there. So that's brilliant. We don't have to do that one. It's just the zombie body hit left animation that's been mirrored. And then we'll just work on this final one, which is zombie hit chest. The really annoying thing about this is it's a pre-baked animation. Okay, so we're going to have to create a custom curve that has a footstep at 44% and 68. 44 and 68. Okay, so let's now then select our custom animation curves folder, go to the assets menu, go to the create submenu and choose to create a custom curve, and we'll call this a zombie hit chest. So let's select the custom animation curves folder, select our zombie hit chest curve that we just created, open it up, and let's add some keyframes at 44 and 68. So 44 is about there. Add key. We'll add another key next to it, won't we? And we'll just move that along for now. And we'll add another one about here to turn it off. Like so. And then the other one is at 68, which is around about here, right? Add key. Add key. Move that along so they're close to each other. I'm going to go back over and edit these keys in a minute to make sure that they've all got the correct values in it. Okay, so let's now edit these keys. So let's edit the first one. That needs to have a value of 0. Edit the second one. That needs to have a value of 1. And it also needs to be 44%, we said, didn't we? Cool. Let me shut down the curve window and then reopen it so it rescales. With this third key, let's edit it. Let's set this to 1 as well. That's the first footstep done. So let's now go over to this key here, which is, actually no, I need to check they are all clamped to 0 as well when I drag them. Yeah, this one's clamped to 1, this one's clamped to 0. That's cool. Okay, the next key needs to be a 0, which it is. It's a little bit too far along, so we'll set that one to say something like 66. And the one next to it, which is supposed to be the 1, we'll set that to 68%, which is where the second footstep is supposed to happen. And we'll set it to 1. Edit the next key, set that to 1. And edit the final key and just check that is definitely 0, which it is. And there is our custom curve. Cool. Okay, so let's now configure these bottom 3 animations so they have audio collection player scripts on them that can play the footsteps. Because remember, all we've added at the moment is the layered audio source player, which is going to play the pain sound. But we also need an audio collection player to listen to those footstep requests on COM channel 1 and trigger them. So let's select zombie body hit left first of all, add an audio collection player, make sure that its command channel is COM channel 1, assign it the zombie footsteps audio collection. This one doesn't need a custom curve, it's got its own curve, but it does need a layer exclusions, and we need to use the hit layer string list, which just excludes the cinematic layer above it. We'll go and do its mirror over on the other side, zombie body hit right, once again adding an audio collection player, making sure the command channel is COM channel 1, assigning it the zombie footsteps audio collection, not assigning it a custom curve, and assigning it the hit layer string list for exclusions. And then finally, in this middle animation here, zombie hit chest, which is the one we just created the custom curve for, we're going to add a new audio collection player, and we assign it the footsteps audio collection. We do assign it that new custom curve that we just created, which is called zombie hit chest. And once again, we assign it the hit layer string list of layer exclusions. And that should be our hit layer done. So we can probably test that now. Yeah. Yeah, so that worked. Okay, so we can see what's happened there is that when we kill the zombie, it ragdolls. We still have the roaming audio playing, so we'll have to sort that out in a minute. But for now, we have seen that all of our zombie hits are working. Okay then, so next we'll fix that problem where we hear the zombie roaming audio sounds playing even when the zombie is dropping to a ragdoll. We need to add some code that's going to mute the layered audio source while we're dropping into a ragdolled state. So to do that, we're going to select our AI entity object and we're going to open up our AI zombie state machine in MonoDevelop. The function that we're looking for is the take damage function, which is called whenever the zombie is hit by something. So let's scroll down to the take damage function. Here it is. I'm sure you will remember this function. We spend a lot of time in here. And it's this function where we decide, first of all, if the zombie is in a ragdolled state already, then we handle it slightly differently. But if it's not, then we decide whether, depending on where the body's been hit and the strength at which the zombie's been hit, whether we should ragdoll or not. And you can see it all comes down to this bottom conditional here, which says if we shouldn't ragdoll, well, then we configure the animator so it plays one of our step back animations. But if we should ragdoll, then you can see this is where we disable the nav agent, the animator and the collider. And it's exactly here that we should also mute the layered audio source of this zombie. So what I will say is I'll put a comment in there saying mute audio while ragdoll is happening. And we'll just first of all check that we do have a valid reference to a layered audio source. And if we do, then we'll simply call the layered audio source's mute function, passing in true, which indicates that we wish to mute and not unmute the audio source. So I'm going to save that off now, go back to the editor. So what I'll do now is I'll press play and then I'll shoot her a few times in the head to make her ragdoll. And you can see she's gone down and we no longer have the zombie roaming sounds playing. Let me just shoot her in the legs now and just make sure that the layered audio source does continue to play once she reanimates and gets back up. Yeah, there you go. So providing she's not dead, the roaming sound will start playing again, because you'll remember in our layered audio source script, as soon as we issue a play command, if that layer was previously muted, it's automatically assumed to be unmuted again because it's had another play request. So that's why that works. When the zombie ragdolls, we mute the audio source, but as soon as the zombie is out of the ragdoll and playing, for example, one of these animations on the cinematic layer, we know that a new play request is going to be issued to play the zombie roaming audio, and that's going to unmute the channel. Okay, so I think the next thing we'll work on actually, well, we've got two layers we need to work on. We need to work on the interactive layer, which has our screaming animation, which needs to have a footstep and a scream in it. And we actually have two screaming animations that we're going to use throughout our zombies. So I'll look at both of those and we'll have to create curves for those, I think. Actually, no, we're not going to create curves. I'm going to do something slightly different with the screaming animation, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But we also have the cinematic layer. Quite a lot of animations on here. Now, fortunately, most of these animations won't need curves. For example, things such as this animation doesn't need anything other than just to make sure that it's playing the groaning sounds. Same as this one, doesn't need a curve, no footsteps. Same as this one where the zombie's just twitching. So on all of these, we'll literally just put layered audio sources that are playing the zombie roaming audio collection. Same here. This is where it starts to get into a crawl. Doesn't need any footsteps or any other sounds other than the layered audio source playing the zombie roaming audio. But we do have the reanimate from front and reanimate from back. And these are going to need to have a few footsteps there. As you can see, bump, bump. And the same for reanimate from back. When he gets up, boom. Just one footstep there. And then we also have the crawl feeding intro, where that doesn't need to have any footstep sounds or anything like that. That's just where it's crawling and it goes into a feeding state. This is the actual feeding state, where the zombie's actually feeding. This also doesn't need any curves. It's just going to need to have a layered audio source on it that's playing the feeding sound. And then we have the crawl outro as well, which also doesn't need to have any sounds other than just the zombie roaming audio, the moaning and the groaning. However, we do have something a little bit different with our zombie eating state. This is what we go into when the zombie sees a corpse on the floor. As you can see, we have this animation here, which is the animation that transitions the zombie from an upright pose into a feeding state on its hands and knees. And as you can see, boom, boom, we're going to need a few little sounds for when the knee hits the floor. Possibly just one, yeah. But of course, if you look in the inspector, you can see that this is a pre-baked animation. So we're going to have to do that via a custom curve. The same is also true for the transition back out of the feeding state into an upright state. Boom, 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 boom. There's actually 4 footstep sounds that need to be made there. Look. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's also a pre-baked animation, so we're going to have to do a custom curve for it. And the feeding state itself, well, that's just a looping animation that has the zombie continually feeding. So we don't have to put any curves in that. We can just use a layered audio source that's playing that feeding sound. Okay, so let's get started on some of the easier ones here. So we'll start with no legs front, and we'll add to that a layered audio source. And the audio collection that will be used will simply be zombie roaming. That's the one where the zombie is just moaning and groaning. These are kind of terminal animations, right? Once the zombie is in this state, it's never coming back out of it. So we want it to be looping. Same for no legs back, which is this one. So we'll select it. We'll add an AI layered audio source. And we'll assign it the zombie roaming audio collection. Once again, we'll make sure that it's looping. And then we have no body front, which is this one, which once again doesn't need any curves. But as the zombie is alive, it should still be making that moaning and groaning sound. So we'll add an AI layered audio source. We will assign it the zombie roaming audio collection. Just check that it's looping. Once again, these are terminal nodes in the cinematic layer as well. So once the zombie, for example, is in this state, it's never getting out of that state unless it's actually killed, in which case it becomes a ragdoll. So let's select nobody back, add an AI layered audio source layer to it, assign it the zombie roaming audio collection, and then we'll start on dead to start crawling, which once again, that doesn't really need any curves. You know, we're not going to hear the zombie's hands softly touching the ground. So once again, with this one, we'll just make sure that we have a layered audio source on it that is playing the zombie roaming audio collection. Now, the animate from front and the animate from back, they are going to need some curves, and they're going to need an audio collection player to play those one-shot footstep sounds. But we also want, while the zombie is getting up, to have a layered audio source on it that is playing the zombie roaming sounds. So we'll add that here as well by adding an AI layered audio source and assigning it the zombie roaming audio collection. We'll do the same from reanimate from back. We'll come back and visit these states in a minute, and we'll create curves for them and add an audio collection player to them so it triggers the footsteps. But for now, I'm just kind of setting up the roaming audio. So there you go. Okay, next up we have the zombie eating intro, and I think what I'm going to do with this is, obviously we're going to need to add some curves to it and an audio collection player to it, but rather than just use a layered audio source that has the zombie roaming sound, so it's still going, I think when the zombie is in this short animation, I'm actually going to reuse the pain audio collection, which is the one which we've just added to our hit layer, which has the zombie making sounds such as, ah! So I think that'd be pretty cool, right? So the zombie runs up to a body, it sees it, and then as it drops down onto the floor, it goes, ah! So we'll add a layered audio source player to it, but this time we'll assign it the zombie pain audio collection, which will make it go, ah! As it finds the body. We don't want this to be a looping audio collection. And we'll also add the same to the zombie outro as well. So it goes, ah! When it stands up. Of course, we'll also have footsteps playing, but we'll do that in a separate pass in a minute. So to the zombie eating outro, I'm going to add another layered audio source player to it, and I'm going to assign that the pain audio collection as well. And in the feeding state, of course, which is just a continual feeding animation, we'll just add a layered audio source that uses our zombie feeding audio collection. And we also need to make sure it's looping. In this particular case, it doesn't matter if we click stop on exit, but we don't have to, because we know that the only way that this animation can exit is to go into this animation. And this is playing an audio collection anyway using the layered audio source. So it just means that this will immediately override the feeding sound. So we don't need to bother selecting stop on exit there, although it wouldn't cause any harm if you did. Okay, so that's the zombie upright feeding animation states done, at least with respect to their layered audio sources. Let's now set up the crawling ones the same way. So I think what we'll do is as the zombie crawls over, finds a food source and goes into this state here, we'll do the same thing. Rather than just play a we'll have a sound. So we'll use that zombie pain audio collection again. So I'm going to add an AI layered audio source player and assign it the zombie pain audio collection. For the feeding outro, I'm going to do the same thing. This is a very short animation, so it's just going to make a little sound as it exits, which just makes it sound more organic. So I'm going to add an AI layered audio source and assign that as well, the zombie pain audio collection. We don't need any of those to be looping actually. And then next up we have the crawling feeding, which once again is a continual feeding state, so we just need to add an layered audio source to it, make sure that it is looping and assign it our zombie feeding audio collection. And once again, we don't need to bother about doing stop on exit because it will automatically be stopped on exit when it goes into this state, which plays a different layered audio source sound on the same layer. Okay, so that is all of our layered audio sources added, but we do have a few things we need to do to this layer. First of all, for reanimate front and reanimate from back, we need to add some curves that's going to play some footsteps. And we also need to create some custom curves for the zombie eating intro and the zombie eating outro, because you can see these need footsteps as well, but they're pre-baked animations. Okay, so let's start with the easiest ones where we can add the curves directly to the animation, and that's reanimate from front and reanimate from back. So let's start by selecting the reanimate from front animation state and readying it for its curve by adding an audio collection player to it. We're going to assign this to COM channel 3, okay? Remember, this is the cinematic layer and we're only interested in getting commands that are specific to footsteps on this layer. Now, I know we have this whole layer exclusion thing going. So, for example, if the base layer was playing footsteps, but the cinematic layer was active, the base layer scripts wouldn't actually play those sound effects. But we talked about this before in great detail. The problem that we have is we don't have any control over what's sent into the parameters. So even though the base layer wouldn't actually be making any sounds, the curves on the animations playing on the base layer would still be getting passed in to the various parameters. So if we used COM channel 1 for the cinematic animations as well, then COM channel 1 will not only be non-zero when the curves on the cinematic layer dictate that a footstep should be played, but it will also be non-zero when the animations on the base layer are dictating that a footstep should be getting played. And that's why we created lots of different COM channels so that different layers don't have these problems. We know that COM channel 3 isn't being used by anything on the base layer or the lower body layer. So we know that's a pretty safe place to send in the footstep commands for the cinematic layer. So let's reselect our cinematic layer, select our zombie reanimate from front, and make sure that we assign that COM channel 3. And we'll do that for all of the footstep scripts on this cinematic layer. We'll assign it the zombie footsteps audio collection. This doesn't need a custom curve because we can assign the curve directly to this animation, and we'll do that in a moment. It also doesn't need a layer exclusion string list because this is the last layer. There's nothing that can override it. So let's now do the same thing for reanimate from back. We'll add an audio collection player. We'll assign it COM channel 3. We'll also assign it the zombie footsteps audio collection. Once again, no custom curve needed, no layer exclusions or string list needed. So now I'm going to double click on reanimate from front. So the actual animation itself comes up in the inspector. And of course I want to add a curve to this, and I need to call this curve COM channel 3. Because that's the parameter we wish to send this curve's values into. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do is at the beginning of this animation, just as the arms are being dragged back, I'm going to put a 2 in the curve, which we know is going to trigger a sound from the second bank in the footsteps, which is that dragging sound. So it's going to sound like we're hearing that the arm is being dragged back across the floor. So I'll put it about there. I'll add a keyframe, another keyframe there, turn it off about there. Yep. And then there's where the first footstep goes there. So we'll add a curve there. We'll add something there. Just a little. Doesn't need to be too big. And the final footstep about there. So that's the start of the peak. And that's the end of the peak there. So now I need to go over these and assign them their actual values. So remember, for this first one we want a 2 because we want to play the foot dragging sound. Okay, Then we'll go on to this next one. We'll put a 1 in there because that's a standard footstep sound, so we only want to sample from the first bank. And the same for the second footstep sound there as well. Okay, looks good to me. So drag, footstep, footstep. Yeah, okay, I'm going to hit apply. And then we're going to add the curve to reanimate from back. By doing the same thing, we're going to double click on the reanimate from back animation state. That's going to call up the reanimate from back importer in the inspector. And we're going to add a curve to it. And that curve, of course, needs to be called COM channel 3. And let's see what happens on this animation. Well, it doesn't need I don't think it needs a dragging. Oh, actually it does need a dragging sound because you can see him dragging the legs in a little bit. So I think we can probably play a drag sound about there. So I'll add a keyframe there. That's going to play a 2. Cool. And then the feet hit the ground there as well, don't they? So we'll put a footstep sound there. Turn it off there. Well, when I say turn it off, you know what I mean. It's not really turning it off. It's just a way of making it go back to 0 again. Okay, I think that's all we need now, isn't it? Boomf. Yeah, no more footsteps. Okay, so let's go back and assign their values. So this first one is a drag, so it needs to have a value of 2. Second curve is just a standard footstep, so it needs to have a value of 1. Okay, let's hit apply. And let's test these by pressing play and shooting the zombie in the legs so that we don't kill it and it can reanimate. Okay, let's shoot this puppy. Oh, and it's gone down. Okay, here we go. That worked quite well. And you can see that one's working as well. Let's just play that one more time and see if we can activate the reanimate from front, is it? Might do it. Perfect. Yeah, that works great. And now it should just go into the... yeah, and you can see the zombie roaming works on that one as well. Probably need to offset that animation a little bit. Looks like he's hovering in the air a tiny bit there, but not a big deal. We can always adjust that by just tweaking the import settings of that animation, just to give it a bit of a Y offset. But we'll do that towards the end when we're doing all the final bells and whistles. We need to create some custom curves for the zombie eating intro and the zombie eating outro. So let's create those custom curves now. In the project view, I'm going to select my custom animation curves folder, and I'm going to create 2 actually. I'm going to create the first one. It's going to be called zombie eating intro. So let's create a custom curve, call it zombie eating intro. And once again, with the custom animation curves folder selected, we'll go to the assets menu again, create another curve, and we'll call this zombie eating outro. Okay, so what I'll do first of all is I will call up the zombie eating intro animation and I will lock that. And then what I'll do is I will select my custom curve, that's the zombie eating intro one, and access that via the second inspector that we have open up here. So I've selected my custom curves folder and I've selected zombie eating intro. So I think we'll have just one footstep there where it hits the floor. So around about 85. That will do, I think. So let's open up the animation curve window, and 85 should be about there. Add a key, add another key there, just move it back, make sure it's clamped to 0. And then add another key there, move that back a bit, and add another key there. Okay, so let's open up that key. Yeah, that's at 84 and it should be 0. Then I'm going to edit this key and set it to 1. I'm going to close down the animation curve window, reopen it again so we can see what we're doing. Edit the second key along, make that 1 as well, and now we can probably drag these out a little bit more like that, make it more square. Edit those and just make sure that as I drag them I didn't change their values. Yeah, see, like that one there isn't exactly 1. We want it to be exactly 1. Okay, so that's our first custom curve done for zombie eating intro. So I'm going to unlock the inspector now because we wish to now select the zombie eating outro animation. So I'm going to select that by double clicking on zombie eating outro on the cinematic layer of Duos Animator. I'm going to lock the inspector, and then I'm going to once again via the other inspector show the zombie eating outro curve. So I've selected custom animation curves in the project view, selected zombie zombie eating outro, it has a footstep there at 0.3, another one at 0.49. So let's do those two first of all. So 0.3 is there, add key. Let's just add some keys a minute and then I'll move them all around. So this is the one that's supposed to happen at 0.3, right? So let's move that there, that there, that in there, and that around about there. And let's just edit these and make sure they've all got the right values. So that one there should be a 1. And we said it should also happen the first footstep at 0.3. Let's close down the curve window and open it up again so it rescales. And then we'll set this third key to 1 as well. And we'll just bring that across a little bit more like that. Make sure it's 0. Like so. And then we said the second footstep was 0.49, which is about here, right? Somewhere around here. So let me set that one to 0.49. Needs to be a 1. Like so. And we'll add another one about there. Make sure it's got flat handles. Set that to 1 as well. Okay, set that final one down to 0. Let's just close that down a moment and see where there's another footstep here, right there at 0.65. So let's add that one. Edit key, edit key, edit key. That needs to be at 0.65. That needs to be at 1. Oh, that worked out quite well. I put that first one right where it needed to be. Yep. And we'll just make that a little spike there. Flatten the handles. Set the value to 1. And then create another key to turn off the footstep. Flatten it again. Edit key. And a 0. And then we've got another footstep, haven't we, at 0.79, and that's the final one. 0.79. Right there, I think. Close. 0.78. Set that to 1. We'll add another key about here. Flatten that. Set that to 1 as well. Add another final key, flatten that, set that down to 0. Cool. Okay, so that's the second and final custom curve created for this layer. So let's untick the inspector, go back to our zombie eating intro state in the animator, and we need to add an audio collection player to it. It doesn't matter what COM channel it's on because it's going to be using a custom curve. So we'll assign it the footsteps audio collection. We will assign it the zombie eating intro custom curve. Of course, it doesn't need a layer exclusion string list because this is the final layer. Nothing can override it. Then we'll select zombie eating outro animation state. We will add an audio collection player to that. We will add the footsteps audio collection to be the collection to play, and we will assign it the zombie eating outro custom curve, and once again, no layer exclusion string list. Now, rather stupidly, I've just realized that I've deleted my dead body zombie from the scene, which I wanted to use as a food source test to test this zombie feeding animation stuff. Rather than just create another dead body zombie, I'm going to do something even quicker than that, which is I'm just going to create a collider which the zombie sees as the food source, right? Because a dead body zombie really was just a zombie in a dead animation pose with a collider on it that is configured as a food source. So I think I'll just create the food source. So just temporarily, I'm going to create a new game object by going to the game object menu and create empty. And then I'm going to configure that to be a AI food source. And I'm going to assign it to the visual aggravator layer. And I'm going to add a sphere collider to it. And I'll open it up a little bit. Oh, no I won't. I'll close it. That's quite big, isn't it? Something like that. and we'll put it there so the zombie will hopefully see it as soon as I press play. And what I probably need to do now is get my controller rig out of the way so that the zombie doesn't come chasing after me instead of the food source. So we'll put it over here like that. Let's press play. Oh, let me check that Zombie Jill is actually hungry, that her satisfaction isn't too high, otherwise she won't feed. And I'm also going to turn off maximize on play, right, so we can see what's happening from the scene view. There she is. Works perfectly, doesn't it? I even like the little before she drops. Let's see what Zombie Jill's satisfaction's doing. There you go, and she also goes when she gets back up, and off she goes. Also, you just saw there a very quick and simple way of emulating a food source in your scene just by adding an empty game object. Actually, I will probably need to test that again in the future, so I'm just going to call that food source and just turn it off. Actually, no, I'm going to leave it on because I want to test the crawling feeding now. So what I'll do is I'll select Zombie Jill's AI entity, and once again I'll give a lower body damage that's past the limp threshold, which is, what's the limp threshold? It's 30, so I'll give her like 40 damage. So she should start off in a crawling state. It didn't work, so I started off in a limping state, not a crawling state. So the crawl threshold is actually 70, so I need to put that to say 76. So here she is crawling over. Okay, so let me just see how she comes out of it by just nudging up. Yep, perfect. So that all works. Brilliant stuff. So our cinematic layer is now configured with all the sounds that it needs. All we need to do now is work on the scream layer. But before we do that, I will just set Jill's lower body damage back down to 0 so she doesn't start off in a limping state again. And I will now turn off the food source. So our interactive layer is quite basic at the moment. It just has a single state on it called screaming. And just to remind you of this animation, in fact, actually what I'll do is I will bring up the project view, select the motion field, because we actually have 2 screaming animations that we're going to use on our various different animation controllers. So at the moment, Jill is using this one, which is called Mutant Roaring, like so. And as you can see, that animation contains a foot going down, a scream, and then a foot coming back. So there's kind of 2 footstep sounds, a scream sound, and probably a big breath inhale about there as well. And we also have another one called Zombie Scream down here. And as you can see, this one's a little bit different. Not actually any footstep sounds, more of a short scream, that one. So we're going to need to create 2 types of screaming wave files. One for what I call the short scream, which is this one here. And one for the long scream, which is this one I just showed you, which is called Mutant Roaring, which is a much longer animation with a much longer scream. Now, if you look in the project view, drill down into the sounds folder and into the zombie sounds folder, you'll see there's a screams subfolder. And you can see that we've already imported 2 scream wave files called long scream and short scream. Let's both select those now, force them to mono, set them to be PCM, we don't want any compression, and then click apply so that they're imported how we want them. And let's listen to, first of all, the long scream. Now you'll notice that it has quite a few components to it. It has like a little roar at the beginning, then a breath inhale and a footstep. Listen again. And the short scream sounds like this. Now, the important point about this wave file here, and in fact the same for the long scream wave file, is that you'll notice the scream doesn't start until some time into the wave file. And that's because if we call up our screaming animation, you'll notice the same is true here. The scream doesn't start until around about 30% of the way through the animation. So I had to create wave files that started at the same time as the animation and were synced up perfectly so that 30% through the wave file, that's where the scream starts, and that's also where the footstep goes down. And before the scream starts, around about 14% into the animation, we get a bit of a breath inhale, and we also have a little bit of a at the beginning just as she's getting ready to scream. There was several ways that I could have done this, okay? So one of the ways that we could do this with our screaming animation state is we could have created a separate scream WAV file that just started screaming right at the beginning of that audio file. And we could have that triggered by, let's say, a curve on the animation so that it only starts to scream when the curve tells it to start to scream, in other words, halfway through the animation file. And we could also create curves for the footsteps as well. But the reason I didn't want to do that with the screaming is if we make it a curve controlled thing, then we're going to have to use our audio collection player script. And of course that script treats the sounds as one shot sound. So the reason I didn't do that is, let's just say, for example, that the zombie starts screaming, and when it's halfway through its scream, we then shoot the zombie. Well, that's going to trigger one of these animations on the hit layer. That's going to trigger a pain sound such as ah, and that pain sound will be getting played at the same time as the scream sound. And then that'll sound weird. It'll sound like the zombie's got two voice boxes. So what I decided to do instead is, for the screaming sound effect, I basically built a WAV file that contains all of the components of the screams, things such as the footsteps going down, the scream starting at the correct position through the WAV file, so that when we enter this state, we can just start it as soon as the animation starts playing, and we can just use our layered audio source to play that sound. And what's really cool about that is, while the zombie is screaming, if we then were to attack the zombie and it was to do one of these step back animations, the sound going ah would actually override the screaming sound, and we wouldn't have kind of two voices coming from the zombie. But what's even better is, once the zombie is finished stepping back in its pain animation, the interactive animation would take over again, and it would continue screaming. So you'd get something like ah, then ah, ah, like that, which I thought was better. And it also means we don't have to create a load of curves for our screaming animation. We can just implement it as a layered audio source and just start that sound playing the minute we enter this screaming animation state. So like I said, the one we've got there at the moment is called Mutant Roaring. So all we need to do to implement this scream is use the long scream sound effect. So I'm going to add an AI layered audio source player to it. And oh, of course I can't add it a collection because I need to create a collection that's got both of our screams in it. So let's do that first. So I'm going to select my sounds folder, my audio collections folder, and I'm going to create a new asset, and I'm going to create a audio collection, and I'm going to call this Zombie Screams. Like so. I'm going to assign this, of course, to the zombies audio group. For now, I'll set the volume down to, I don't know, about 0.3. I'll set the spatial blend down to 0 for now, just so that we don't get any attenuation and we can definitely hear it. And then what I'm going to do is create two clip banks in this audio collection. The first bank will contain a single clip, which is the short scream, and the second bank will contain the long scream. So let's create two banks, like so. And we'll create one clip in each bank. And in the first bank, I'm going to put the short scream. So let me just lock the inspector for a moment and then drill down into my zombie sounds and my screams folder. And I'll drag the short scream over and drop it in bank 0. And I'll drag the long scream over and put that in bank 1. So now when I go back and, let me unlock the inspector first of all. When I then select my screaming animation state, because this is the mutant roaring motion, which is the one that needs the long scream, is we will assign it our zombie screams audio collection, but we will tell it to play the scream in bank 1, which is the long scream, not the scream in bank 0. So when we create another animation controller for a different zombie and we wish to use the shorter scream animation instead, all we need to do is just come into this animation state and change that to bank 0, and that will play the short scream instead. But like I said, because we're currently using the long scream, I'm telling it to play the long scream from the audio collection. We don't want it to be looping. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to test that this works, and then I'm going to tell you how I was able to make the long scream and short scream sound effects such that they sync up exactly with the animation clip. And it's just going to be a very quick overview, because I know that some of you may want to do this and you might think, well, how do I do that? And I'll show you how I do it. But before we do that, let's select Zombie Jill's AI entity. Let's make sure that we give her a really high scream chance. Okay, so she screams immediately as soon as she sees us. And then what I need to do is go back to the scene view. I turned off the food source, didn't I? Yeah. I think I'll just press play and I'll just run to where Jill is. There you go, worked perfectly. So, and I could show you the short scream with the short scream animation, but I'm sure you'll believe me when I say that it all works fine. So let's just have one last look at that. You'll notice that when just before she screams, you hear a little footstep go down and everything is synchronized up. So there you go. Let's put the scream chance down to what it was before, which was 0.05. Wow, that's a very slight scream chance. And that's our screaming layer done already. So I'm going to kind of leave it there for this lesson. There are a few other things we need to add, not to the animation controller, but just to the AI zombie state machine that is going to deal with Jill getting hit when she's in a ragdoll and how we may still want sounds to be made. For example, if the zombie is on the ground and it's ragdolled but it's not dead, then when it's in that ragdolled state before it starts animating again, if we shoot it or hit it, it should probably still make a pain sound. However, we can't really do that via the animator because when Jill is in a ragdolled state, the animator is turned off, it's deactivated. None of this logic is actually working. So we're going to need to add some special case code to the AI zombie state machine so that when it's in a ragdoll, the actual script itself can play a pain sound in that very specific situation. Okay, so let me save that off. I think we're done for today with respect to that. So let's talk a little bit about how I made these scream sound effects so that they sync up with the animation. And it's really delightfully easy, but what you do need, if you want to follow the way that I do it, is you will need a video editor such as Adobe Premiere or Sony Vegas. And what I do is I first of all find the animation that I wish to make a sound for. So in this case, it's mutant roaring. And I open up the screen nice and big like so. I make sure I've rolled right the way back to the beginning frame of the animation. And then what I do is use video screen capture software such as Camtasia Studio, which is the one that I used, but there's lots of other ones out there. And I just record the animation. So I make sure that I'm recording the screen first, and then I press the play button. And it's very important that I record myself pressing the play button because that's where I know the animation has actually started playing. So I can step through this one frame at a time in the video editor, and I'll know that the moment that thing starts moving, that's the first frame from which the sound needs to be aligned to. So at this point, what I've done is I've recorded and screen grabbed a piece of video of my animation clip playing. And then what I do is I bring together all of the sounds, the separate sounds that I think I'm going to want to use, such as a footstep, the screaming sound. Most of these I just made myself. One or two I was able to find on YouTube videos and rip the sound out of them. And then what I do is I bring the video, first of all, into Sony Vegas, which is my tool of choice. So you can see that when I first bring this thing in, right, it's capturing everything in the video. And you can see it's even capturing a load of dead space at the beginning where I haven't actually pressed play yet. So what I need to do is I need to step through that one frame at a time until I start to see that little timeline thing move. And I know that that's the first frame of the animation, which, you know, just happens to be there. So I bring that in other words, I'm throwing away all of the first bit of the video so that I've now got just a single video track. Pretend for the moment that none of these other tracks are here, okay? These are just sound tracks. And this second track here is just the audio track that comes in with the video, so it's got nothing on it at all. So it's really just a video that I'm interested in. And you can see if I play it, there is my mutant roar there. And when it gets to the end, I also make sure that I stop it right when the animation reaches the very last frame of the timeline. If you're wondering what this stuff is over here, this same project contains the long screen, which is what you're seeing here, and this section here after this little gap in the timeline is the short screen. You can see I did them all in the same Sony Vegas project, but what I'm going to do for now is just concentrate on the long screen. So all I've done at this moment then is I've screen captured the animation within Unity through the animation preview window, then I've brought that clip into Sony Vegas, I've put it on a video track, and then I've basically trimmed the left and right bits of the video track so that when I press play, I'm at the very first frame of the animation playing, and it goes right till the very last frame of the animation playing. So I now know that if I create any audio tracks, any audio clips that I bring in, I can move their positions along on the timeline and sync them up with exactly what's happening in the actual video window. So let me see what's happening on this first track. You'll see I've brought in two separate WAV files and I've positioned them so that they create footsteps. So at the very start, I have a little footstep here, which technically is not needed, but it's just put there because it's supposed to be like the zombie is kind of getting ready to scream. Because you've got to remember, when we go into a screaming animation, we're probably going to be doing it from another animation blending in. So for me, I just thought if the zombie was running and then it started to scream, we would want to have a little footstep sound at the beginning of it, and that would probably sync up with what was actually happening on screen with the zombie blending from a walk or a run into the scream. So what I'm going to do now is just play this track here that I've highlighted with the two footstep sounds on. See? And you can see that I've moved them around, and it's really easy with a piece of software like Vegas. You can just move drag the file in, and then you can just move it around like so and get it synced up exactly to where the footsteps should happen. So for me, I put it there, which actually looks a little bit late. Probably should have been a frame or two earlier. So at first, on my first track of audio, all I've got is kind of like a shuffle sound here and then a footstep sound, like so. Next up, I bring in another WAV file, which is this one here, which is kind of like a big breath inhale. So, and you can see I sync that up so that it starts playing just as she sort of pulls her body back, like she's taking a big breath, just like she's about to scream. So that's like the breath inhale, like so. So let's see those two tracks now played together. Okay. And then on the third audio track, you can create as many audio tracks as you want and drag in as many WAV files as you want with these things. Let's just play this track on its own for a moment. At the beginning, I put, I think, one of the little pain sounds. And there's the actual main scream there. So you can see if we play all that together, and notice that just as she starts to scream is when the scream WAV file starts playing, and that's just because of how I've positioned it. You can see that we now get this. And finally, I also put something on another audio track, a fourth audio track. Not quite sure what that is. Let me solo it a minute and see what it is. Oh, it's just like a little bit of a growly groan thing. And I fade the scream, because the scream that I found on the internet actually went on much longer than this scream. What I do is I faded the scream out, and as the scream is fading out, I kind of fade in a kind of low growl so that it doesn't sound like I'm just fading the scream out. It sounds like it's changing into, so it's going kind of like that. So let's hear it all together. Cool. So at this point, I now know that at least within Vegas, all of these WAV files are synced up perfectly to this video clip. So all I have to do now is I have to select just the section that I've created, the trimmed section of the video clip, and I can export this out, or render it out as these programs often call it, as a WAV file. And I think pretty much every video editing package allows you to do this. Rather than just render out to a video, you can actually choose to render out to a WAV file. So in Vegas, all I do is I select the bit I wish to render out. I do render as, and those are all the different formats I can export to. And I just choose WAV, and I just choose default, which is just standard uncompressed WAV file. And then, I render that out. I just click the render button, and what that will do is simply throw away the video, but it will just render all of this stuff as we've mixed it here on the left into a single WAV file. And those are the WAV files that you've now got in your project. So that is how I create sounds that need to sync up with animations. And this is how I do all of the sound effects for the first person arms, the weapon reloads and all things like that. I'll bring in like a weapon reload animation where I have maybe the arms, first of all, pulling the gun up, then yanking the clip out. And I just find metal sounds of like clips and chinks and all sorts of sounds, and I move them around on the timeline so that they all sync up with the actions in the animation. And what you end up is something that actually sounds like a proper gun reload if you find the right sort of sounds. So that's how we got this scream synchronized up. Okay guys, so I think I'm going to leave it there for this lesson. Like I said, our animator controller for Jill is pretty much done now from a sound perspective, but we do need to add some things to the AI Zombie State Machine that's going to allow us to create some sounds even when we're in a ragdolled state. But we'll do that in the next lesson. The next lesson is going to be primarily devoted to giving the player rig pain sounds as well. But we'll do the player rig pain sounds first, and then at the end we'll just put the extra code in the AI Zombie State Machine, so that we also deal with a case where we might have a crowbar and we're hacking the shit out of Jill when she's in a ragdoll state. We still want to hear some sounds being made. Okay guys, thanks for listening. I'll see you next time. Bye bye now.